Okay, well, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good week. This is week three. We're moving along here, and this week's zybook stuff is really important stuff. It really gets at the guts of what it means to do SQL and to go beyond just a simple structure of tables and talk about manipulating those tables. But before we get started, I just got this email today. I think it's really interesting. You guys should be involved in this kind of stuff. Um, most likely you're going to be spending most of your career out in the cloud. You're probably going to have a lot of work to do in Amazon. And if you don't know about Amazon, if you haven't been exposed to, what they do, then this is a good place to start. And you should start somewhere. Might as well be here. So you can probably sign up for this. Looks like a free thing. There's plenty of training opportunities out there for you, either directly from Amazon or from LinkedIn Learning or whatever. And so, sign up for these things, participate in these things, take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. Okay, so let's see. Whoops, I should start at the beginning. And okay, so week three, like I said, and important stuff to know. Well, not too many announcements so far. Be sure to keep up on those PAs and CAs. Yeah, everybody should get 100, no doubt about it. I've had a couple of people stop by my office hours. That's awesome. Love to see you, love to meet you, and find out what's going on. Particularly now, if you're interested in thinking about your project for the class, now's a great time to think about it. Last time, sorry about the audio and the recording, but anyhow, so at the end of the recording, all I was really saying was that, go out and find ways to get up to speed on BigQuery and Data Looker. That's all. But if you're thinking about a project at this point, you should be, then now's a good time to stop by and chat about it and see if there's any way that I can help you or, whatever. So, remember we've got that group project out there, and that means group. Group means you need to meet people. It's really important that you meet people. And one of the big things you're going to take away from your graduate career are the people that you meet. And so, I know this is an async distance course. It's a nightmare for meeting people, but give it a try. Everybody's in the same boat. If you see a name that looks interesting to you, email them. Say, hey, this is who I am. I'm in your class. Love to chat sometime. Thinking about a group project. Do you have any ideas? And, that'd be great. Nobody's going to be surprised to get those emails because everybody's in the same boat. And resources and stuff to learn BigQuery. Okay, fine. Now let's get into chapter 3. Chapter 3 is interesting because it's your real intro to SQL. Now, one of the really cool things about SQL is this first bullet. The basic operations within one table come down to four separate things, and that's it. Inserting records, selecting records, updating records, and deleting records. That's it within one table. And when we start doing joins across tables, that's when it gets a little bit more complicated. But still, you only have these four different things to pay attention to, and the syntax to operate within them is pretty much the same across all of these four commands. And that's why SQL is so interesting to work with. It does so much with so few commands. Now, the other thing that chapter 3 gets you into is working with the Xylabs. So, you guys are all programmers. You know how this stuff works. So the Xylabs are easy to work with. They just run in your browser. What could be easier? But the question is, how do the Zybook folks grade the output from your Xylabs? And the answer is they look for output themselves. They say, we're going to ask you to run these queries. what's the output from the query. And so you're going to work in the Xylab to write the query. You're going to run it. It's going to perhaps generate output. If it does, then they're going to use some really basic commands to check your output to see if it matches what's expected from the query. And based on that, they're going to give you a grade. And that's all there is to it. From a programmatic perspective, it's all text manipulation, and they're probably just using some awk or some sed or some sort of bash kind of stuff to do the grading. Now, here's the thing. Some queries create output, like select. If you run a select query, you get the rows that you selected for, and they can check to see if you've got the right rows. If you use insert, then they look at the table before, they look at the table afterwards, find out if you inserted them. If you use update, blah, 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 same thing. However, some queries don't create output. What they do is they create new logical structures. So things like a create table statement, that's going to be a lot harder to grade because it doesn't create output in the normal way that the Xylab can grade it. So it's always going to be a little bit iffy when you do those queries that don't create output, like a create table statement that creates a logical structure, but it doesn't do much else. Things like create database or use database, those things, they really don't create much output. But, the Xylab wants to grade you on this. Just, think about what the Xylab has to work with. And as programmers, what you got is what you got. And so, just be patient what's going on. Now, the other things that we do in Chapter 3 are things like installing MySQL. Well, MySQL has a really nice version that's available. You can run on just about any laptop out there. Easy peasy, easy to install, all that stuff. But if you don't want to install it on your laptop for whatever reason, and I can respect this, then what you might want to do would be to create a virtual machine on your laptop, install it in that virtual machine, and then just use that virtual machine for all your work with the client version of MySQL and MySQL Workbench. Feel free to do that, particularly if you're like a Windows person and you want to get some Linux experience. Really easy way to do that is to install the VirtualBox on your laptop. Install a Linux distro, like we use CentOS in the labs on campus and everything. And if you want support on campus, CentOS is probably the best distro of Linux to use to get good support from a person. If you don't need support from a person, or you just want to use online support tools, then probably Ubuntu is the best distro for you. But you can install VirtualBox on your machine, and then in every class that you use, you've got access to a virtual throwaway machine. So if you don't want to install something on your own laptop and have it potentially mess stuff up, install VirtualBox, put a couple of VMs in there. You can do your networking assignments in there. You can do downloads in there. You can do, all different kinds of stuff. And that'll make your life easier once you get going. And then MySQL Workbench, well, that's a really nice client kind of an IDE for SQL. Now, you can use all different kinds of IDEs for to work with SQL. You got clients everywhere, everything from Eclipse to was it Visual Code? What's that one? From Microsoft. Anyhow, Yeah, visual code. Anyhow. So, you can use any of those clients if you want to. You don't have to use MySQL Workbench, but it's just something that people in industry generally know how to work with. They're not going to work in it in their day-to-day, production work, but they may do it just for some really quick, I know I'm connected to the server kind of things to get stuff done. So that's why we do that first lab. And that Sequila database is just a classic database that everybody who's learned SQL has worked with. And it's pretty sophisticated. It's got a lot of components to it. It's got a whole bunch of data in there, lots of different tables, lots of stuff going on. So you can learn a lot using that Sequila database, and it's good for you. So, the neat things. So we've got a couple of different sets of commands that we're doing in SQL this week. One are those basic operations: insert, update, select, delete. Those four things. Now, the other thing that we've got is the create table statements. Now, the create table statements are really important because they establish the rules for everything else that's going to happen. If you look at that Sequila database, the create table statements that were run to create that database were written 15, 20 years ago. And nobody, has changed them around. Why? Because that's what create table statements do. They're things that you run once. You create the table with all its data structure, its column types, its keying, it's all of that stuff. That's all in the create table statement. And then for the rest of your career, you just use those tables that you created. So the create table statement is really important because it kind of sets the rules for everything else that's going to happen with those tables. So pay attention to your create table statements. They may seem silly, but that's what determines everything else from there on. Now, other things that we've got in this chapter are things like databases versus tables. So, we're going to create databases, we're going to use databases, we're going to drop databases, we're going to use all of those commands. But remember that the database is the big structure that within it has lots of tables. So one database, lots of tables. If you look at that Sequila database, one of the neat things about Sequila database is it gives you great examples of what you're going to have to do in other places. And so if you look at the create database Sequila command, there it is. It's creating the database that within it, we're going to build lots of tables. We're going to have queries. We're going to have can queries. We're going to have views. We're going to have functions. We're going to have lots of different things. So create database is the big command that sets this thing up. Then you have to tell SQL which database to use. So when you later run queries, MySQL needs to know which database you're querying. And so that's where you start with the create database, then you use a use database, then you can start doing all your queries in there. Now, other really interesting commands that you run into this week are all these show commands. Show commands don't return, well, they do return output, but they're just useful things to know what's going on. So if you wanted to see, did my create database command actually work? Well, that's where your show databases commands come up. The show tables. If you mess up the naming of your tables or something like that, and you can't find the table, use the show tables command. Show columns. That shows you what columns are in a particular table. And then show create table is probably the most useful command of all because it's like roll back the clock. Show me what rules are I put in place for this table. My queries aren't running for some reason, I don't know why, what were the rules that I set up when I used my create table statement to build this table in the first place, because that's where the rules come from. So that's about all I've got for this week. This is intro stuff. This is really good. You're finally getting a chance to do some SQL, and you're learning how basic this stuff is. The thing to take away from it is that when you run SQL, it's so abstracted. It's so far away from the blood and guts of how the data structures are worked with that you can basically read the SQL and know what's going on. That's pretty cool. Love it. So take care, everybody. Have a good week.